Good evening, and welcome to the Plymouth Charter Commission. We are meeting live in the Great Hall and also over Zoom for anyone who wishes to zoom in on our meeting. This meeting is therefore hybrid, a Zoom webinar, and can be viewed live on the local government channel 15 and 47 Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. Zoom attendees, for public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. In-person audience, for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. So tonight's meeting is, actually it's going to be, I think, quite a bit of fun because we're now at that point in our charter where we are doing serious drafting, putting in innovations, new things, making some changes, of course, to existing provisions, but there's a lot of new things here that are being introduced into our charter, and many of them are coming up tonight. And what we have two memos from the Collins Public Management Center. And if you look at the second memo, which I sent you on Friday, when I got it, that one actually also encapsulates the first memo. So the second memo is really the one to read and absorb, and then you'll know really what is in the first two memos. But the subject matter is the legislative branch, which is Chapter 2 of the Charter, one of the actually most important provisions in the Charter. And what I did, based on that second memo, with some assistance, was to take the actual provisions and start building our charter. And in your packet are pages from our charter that, with the recommended or the to be discussed inserts already included, so you can see how they fit in the charter. And what we're handing out tonight actually is a copy of the pages of the legislative section of the charter. And I think on our timeline, we need to try to have this finished up by the end of our next meeting, a week from tonight. I think we have a good shot at doing that because I think we made some excellent progress here in the last 2 weeks. And by the way, the minutes that Michelle prepared are superb. She has almost I was going to say blow by blow, but that sounds violent. No, we had a discussion by discussion in the last 2 meetings, and she's got it all incorporated in the minutes. But we'll be discussing tonight the Committee of Precinct Chairs, the Finance Committee, town meeting, and the moderator, of course, is also part of the legislative branch. So it's that branch, and then we stop just short of the executive branch, which will be the next topic. I think we should, I suggest that we have an agreement among us that none of this is fixed in concrete. If somebody has a change on a section that we've already discussed and presumably preliminarily adopted, we should still be able to make the change right up until we produce our final preliminary draft, because people's minds change, things happen, you think something maybe needs to be fixed or further revised or whatever. So unless anyone disagrees, let's just keep that. Our minds are still open until our final report is produced in 4 months. So looking at I'd like to sort of start with oh, by the way, the Collins folks won't be here tonight by agreement. They don't need to come every week. They give us some work product in between meetings, and they come to our meetings, we discuss it, and we work on our own, and then they will be here, for example, next week. So they will be coming to our meetings probably about every other meeting, but not tonight. A week from tonight, they will be present. So looking at the Collins Memorandum number 2, in that memo, they propose a reorganization of the legislative branch chapter. To strengthen the legislative branch, they've incorporated, I think actually quite well, most of the requests that we made for changes in the powers or the responsibilities of the COPC. There's a couple things that they are still thinking about and doing some more research. When we come to them, we can note what those are. One thing they could not do, which we asked, and we'll again look at that one, that was appropriating monies in between town meetings. We'll discuss that when we come to it. And then they've done some serious thinking about charter enforcement. And we have 3 specific proposals based on 3 other towns across the state which have provisions for charter enforcement. They're not very common. They're a big problem, but not many towns have do anything about it except grouse about it. But there are 3 different possibilities here that 3 different towns, Provincetown, Orleans, and Falmouth, have in their charters. And the language is here tonight. We'll discuss it. The Collins Center asked us if we'd like them to go back to those 3 towns and see how those provisions are working. And I think we should give them an emphatic yes. Let's see if they are working. They're different, but they each address the question of charter enforcement. So, going to what I thought we could do is first go through the memo and mention the changes, and then actually go through the language, which is in the packet, each page. And if anybody has edits or changes or anything relevant to the provision we're talking about, please mention it so we can make the changes. We'll keep careful notes. And then in between now and next week, we'll incorporate the changes and further develop the draft. So this thing is a work in progress from week to week, and we'll gradually build this charter. I think we're right on target with what they did for us for this particular exercise with the legislative branch. The first thing they did was change the order of the articles and deleted the 2 existing articles on the Committee of Precinct Chairs and moved them to a different section of the charter, so the Committee of Precinct Chairs now has a nice distinct section of its own.
Mr. Chairman, sorry I can't be with you except virtually.
Yes, David.
Should we start the meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance?
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I was so excited what we were going to be doing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Pledge of Allegiance. Good idea.
To the flag of the United States of
of America, to the republic
for which
it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So subsections 234 and 235 have been deleted, and all of section 211 replaced with 2 new sections, 26 and 27, which we will come to. And there needs to be some renumbering. We didn't have time yet to renumber the sections in Chapter 2, but Chapter 2 is the subject tonight, the legislative branch. The new text strengthens the legislative branch's role between town meeting by authorizing COPC to recommend a special town meeting, by actually directing COPC to have a major responsibility in appointing finance committee members, 10 out of 15, with the other 5 to be appointed by the moderator. It adds warrant oversight. When we come to that provision, it's an interesting proposal. It has its own section, warrant oversight, and a committee that would be set up to actually carry that out. It gives the COPC the authority to make warrant article recommendations and allows them to create a consent agenda for the town meeting, which is interesting because I always had problems the last couple of town meetings which had consent agendas, but I think there's a distinction between a consent agenda created by COPC and one that's created by the town manager. I feel more comfortable with a COPC-created consent agenda. The draft does not give COPC the power to make financial or take financial action on behalf of town meeting between regular town meetings. Collins is advising us that by statute and precedent, it's the role of the Advisory and Finance Committee to manage the reserves to use in emergency situations. And the Collins team has not seen any appropriate way to involve COPC in that, and no other towns have done that. They can't see any way to give the COPC that kind of authority. So that's a item they so far have not been able to do. The do have a provision here that allows the COPC to make recommendations on non-financial articles. It's interesting what they're proposing is the Finance Committee would still do financial articles and write a report, and COPC would do non-financial articles. And Collins is telling us that they couldn't find any example in any charter how that specifically is determined between the committees who does which. And they say it's more, the common practice is that the Advisory and Finance Committee makes the determination whether the article has a financial, is essentially a financial matter, because rather than COPC. And COPC also, if it feels an article does not have a financial matter, then COPC could do it. I guess we should ask Collins, does that contemplate both boards in that instance making a recommendation? So we
Mr.
have
Chairman,
more follow-up questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just had a quick question on the Collins response to that question.
Go ahead.
What is it? It's a 2 dash, what section are you referring to?
I haven't gone back to the chart yet, but this is it would be in the finance, in the Advisory and Finance Committee section.
Right. And you were saying that they had determined the best way to determine, because we've been going back and forth about this idea of having the Finance Committee focus on articles that raise an
Right
appropriate.
now, there's nothing in here that states how that's determined. And
Right.
They said there's no example they can find in any charter which states how you define specifically. And the common practice is the Finance Committee makes that determination. I suppose if we don't think if we think there's some risk there, we can further delve into it.
I guess you just don't want to have any confusion or complicate the situation that when we have articles that raise an appropriate, would that be the first indication that they should be heard by the FinCom?
I think the practice would be,
Yeah.
once the warrant comes out, the Finance Committee would look at it, and I think the COPC would too, and they may even have a discussion between the two committee heads as to which committee is going to make the recommendation as to a specific article. But I would think it would be right at the front end.
Right. Somehow just make note of that process, that there is a process of determining if we are going to have committee of precinct chairs focus their attention on articles that are not raised and appropriate, that are focusing on zoning, questions of that nature, and that we have the FinCom focused on the other effort. Shouldn't there be some language so that the chairman of both committees will conference to determine what articles are heard by what board as they relate to raise and appropriating, you know? I don't know, if you leave it, if there's a hole there, then
Well,
it leads to confusion on how will one sort this issue out in the future.
Bill, let's bring this up again, because I was surprised when I read that.
Okay.
Frankly, because we saw so many charters where finance committees are restricted, and they don't report on non-financial articles. And I find it hard to believe that in none of those charters is there some attempt to define which is, what is financial, what isn't. But we should ask them again. They said they couldn't find any definition.
I know, if there isn't, then we should, my point was that we create something in the charter that indicates that we believe that the FinCom should be doing this, and that COPC should be doing this, to have an article go through greater scrutiny and debate and discussion prior to town meeting, anything we can do to escalate that event, that's relevant. So I think that really somehow coming up with language that, say, the chairman of these two committees will conference to determine what committees, you got some questions going on behind you over here.
Seems to me, I mean, we don't have endless time, and the idea of having two chairs stake out their territory unnerves me.
Okay.
It seems to me there should be an arbiter. You know, to me,
Yes.
I don't have a particular, I can't think of anyone other than the moderator to be that arbiter. You know, we can see how it works, but someone has to make a quick decision on what's going to be, so that one committee takes this group,
Right.
one committee takes that group.
Good point. Wrestling.
Yeah, I think we need to define this. I think that it is, you're asking for trouble and turf wars.
Would you
if
feel,
you're-
would you be comfortable with the moderator making that call?
No, I wouldn't.
So who-
Because I think that what we've been discussing is that moderator, how he gets elected and how he gets, defined is something that we're talking about looking at and changing. I think we can come up with something, raise and appropriate, if it says raise and appropriate, if they have to go through things, then you have to look at, CPC stuff where that is, whether that's, defined by that. But I really think we should define that in this charter.
Okay.
I think
Good point.
because
So let's see,
leaving up to
David
the
and then
interpretation
Bill
is not
Cogan.
what we should do.
Could we somehow give this to a department head? For example, anything that deals with financial, give it to Lynn Barrett. Anything that deals with zoning, give it to Lee Hartman and say, look, Committee of Precinct Chairs, this is yours because it's zoning. Could we do it something with the department heads rather than creating a lot of
I mean,
confusion?
how would it work, Dave? Give me, let's make an example.
Well, anything that comes up that's financial, whether it's COPC articles, or whether it's budget articles, or whether it's capital articles, have to go through Lynn Barrett.
Go
Maybe she
through
could
what?
assign them.
Lynn Barrett,
Finance.
yeah. Because my thought was that, one, selectmen have this warrant. The warrant opens, articles are put on it, and it is the town manager and the assistant town manager that act as the coordinators of that event. Now you have Lynn Barrett down in the finance department, or any future finance department head. So what you would do is you would make this between the director of finance and the town manager will determine where these, because the town manager can then reach out to the different articles that are coming forth, whether they pertain to this department or that department. They can be the facilitator and the expediter, because time is of the essence to get this directed in the right meeting. And I would think that it would be between the town manager and the finance director to determine whether or not this was going to go before FinCom or if it was going to go before Committee of Precinct Chairs, based on the language in the article that references raise and appropriate over there, all other articles over there. Because you might not get a zoning article as much as you might get an article about some fur ban or something, so it might not be a zoning article where we're gonna go and change R20 Long Pond Road to light industrial from highway commercial. Obviously, that would be a clear case of a zoning change.
It'd be interesting to get the town manager's take on that.
Yeah.
And something that I really see, what I want to create is something where, if it's not financial, it goes to COPC, so COPC can say, we need planning, we need ZBA, we need these groups that need to be more involved in the legislative branch, coming before them. I think planning should be much more involved in town meeting. The planning board and Lee should, articles that have to do with planning should be, I'd like to see a way, and I think putting it before COPC is a way to get planning and ZBA and everybody involved in it, so that we can come to town meeting and COPC can say, look, we've talked to Lee Hartman about this, we've gotten the
Your
facts.
suggestion is that an article that has a planning component that's fairly major would be automatically COPC.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just looking for something.
No, I would definitely say that. I think we need to come up with something, but
Right.
my end result needs to be that it's vetted by the legislative branch in some way, shape, or form before it comes to town meeting.
Just make one point, and then Larry, having somebody like the town manager make the call, I'm not sure that's a good idea, because it might encourage the manager to have sort of forum shopping.
Well, it would be a conferring.
Decide we'll
with
send
the-
it here or over there, or whatever. Larry
It would
might
be a
have-
conferring, it would be conferring with the finance director. It would not be a sole decision of discretionary of the town manager. It would be like the town manager and the finance director determining where these things go.
Bill, I guess sitting next to you, our ideas are floating without even words going back and forth. Absolutely. Forum shopping concerns me. The other thing that concerns me, with the idea of the town manager or any of his departments, and planning and finance are the town manager's departments, they're executive. And executive groups are there to provide information and advice. But this is the legislature, and the reason that I proposed the moderator is that the moderator is part of the legislative branch. And I completely agree with Wrestling in terms of all of this cooperation, and I also am not going to be talking about any of the personalities who are presently in any of the chairs that we're talking about. But if we're going to have, the reason that we've been wanting to make the COPC stronger is that the COPC is a major component of the legislative branch. And therefore, somehow, whether it's the moderator or we invent a new position, but somehow we have to find someone within the legislative branch to make legislative decisions.
Okay, Bill, could you spell out how your proposal with the finance director?
Well, I'm listening to my fellow commissioners, and I'm developing as they speak. David in Wrestling and Larry are pointing out some very good points. I'm just trying to see the logistics of how these warrants come together, how the articles are, who's most aware of what's coming at them, and where they can direct them. Because sometimes articles find their origins, whether they're coming from, let's say the planning board wants to do a zoning change. They've discussed it, they vote on it, they have a hearing, they write an article, and it's presented by Lee Hartman. It's a clear-cut case. But sometimes a zoning article might be petitioned by a resident to change the zoning area from residential to commercial. We had one like that on Beaver Dam Road once, where the planning board is a little perplexed by this article. They're in opposition to it. So you're right, the shopping mechanism creates a level of confusion that we would have to really direct it to. Maybe it is back to the moderator. He's the guy he or she will be examining motions and processing articles, and they'll have that ability. But maybe it's the moderator conferring with the finance department and the town manager to determine where these things go. So now you have some sort of accountability, not as much shopping. You couldn't shop as easily with three people in the room looking at the article. I think Betsy Hall wants to speak. I'm done.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were done. Is it as simple as any article that has a dollar sign in it would be a finance? And if it doesn't have a dollar sign in it, it's not finance? So there probably,
Every article that has zoning component would be finance?
no,
Any article that has a dollar sign.
Oh, a dollar sign.
Anywhere in it.
I don't know.
then
if
would
that's-
be financial. So there may be a little more sophisticated way to say that, but if it mentions money, it
Raising
seems
the-
to me it's financial.
Well, raising and appropriating, that's what I was nailing in on. So you could theoretically make an argument that this zoning change that's been petitioned by this resident is going to generate a cost to the town. So, so what I was trying to do was find something that actually affects the budget, which the town meeting has oversight in terms of the purse strings. I think David Peck has got his hand up.
Thank you. I have to excuse myself for a few minutes for a priorly scheduled meeting. I just want to say I have a couple comments to share on COPC when I come back. So don't leave the topic or allow me to come back and
Okay,
share
we're
a
ready
couple
for you
comments.
anytime in the next 4 months to make that.
Okay, well, anyway, I should be back in around
But I
15
think
minutes.
this is a very serious question, because I can see situations frequently arise where it's going to be a very hard call unless somebody's ready to make the decision. Once, bingo. I mean, for example, the provision in the last town meeting to put in a pier out on Long Beach, small amount of money, 38,000, I think, was the ultimate final appropriation. But somebody could argue that it was absolutely crucial that we have access out there for people. But the important part of the article was not the expenditure of the money, but that there'd be access. So is that a financial article, or is it a non-financial article?
It's a financial
I mean,
article
there are
all
going
day
to be
long.
situations.
I
It's a
would,
financial
I would
article.
think that there was definitely a financial article. I think that there has to be some middle ground where the finance director gives a suggestion to the moderator or the head of COPC or whatever, on articles saying, this is definitely a financial thing, this is just a bylaw thing, this is a fur thing. But I think that we should look out to, the director of finance and entities like that to give suggestions about where articles should go. But I do think we need to define how that's,
Okay,
who's-
so are you suggesting, is the commission comfortable with the definition being any article involving a dollar sign? That the finance director says, yeah, it involves expenditure
Well,
of
you want
money?
to be clear, you want to be clearer than that, because like I said, someone could argue some theoretical point that this is generating a cost. I think that if it's pertaining to a budget in a fiscal year, that the Springtown meeting has to authorize the budget, it's raising, appropriating, obviously, that's a major determination of the article's condition. But it might be something that requires the moderator.
But
It
you made
requ-
it fuzzy by suggesting major, right?
No, not major, any raising
Any
$1.
raising,
If you are asking the taxpayer for
Single dollar.
$1,
All right.
then it's something the FinCom has to see, period. I think that we could direct the attention to the moderator and the director of finance to make that determination in consultation with the chairman of the
So you're
precinct
you're
chairs.
suggesting the moderator makes the call with consultation with the finance director?
Finance director and the moderator determine, in consultation with the, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm playing around with it.
I think it's a slippery slope, and there's a lot of muddiness to this. And one of the things that comes to mind, I don't have, all the references or all the articles in my mind over the last 15 years, but one that does come to me that's visited fairly frequently is not raising and appropriating, it's who gets the money. There's already money out there, and that's the case of the money for, the pilot agreements on solar and things. That money is out there, that money's coming in, and there's been arguments and discussions and changes, and who gets that money? Does the DMEA get it to take care of the trails and all, or does it go back into the general budget? I would think that's a financial article. That's not a financial article. It's one that the legislature would be probably appropriately the ones to make a decision on that. And I think there's probably more like that where it's muddy. They are saying that this is a difficult, maybe
Okay.
we shouldn't spend too much time on it in that,
Yeah, we got to do some further.
we gotta do
thought
other
about this,
things.
so I can see that.
I think Betsy wants to go, Bill, and then
This one needs a little more work.
Betsy
Betsy?
wanted to talk.
There could be a sentence that says, and because I'm not going to say it right, but in case there's a question, it goes to the finance committee. I mean, if it's murky, we won't use that word, but then the finance committee hears it. In other words, if there's rather than having a 3-hour
I suppose,
debate, which one
yeah.
it should go to, there could be some sort of a sentence that says, if it's a debatable, then it goes to finance.
Who makes that decision?
I agree with Frank that we don't want to go down a slippery slope and muddy the waters, but all articles do, what town meeting is doing is voting to authorize this expenditure. They're not, the article itself tells you where the money's going, because the money will say it's going to the general fund, or it's going to whatever fund it's going to. That's a motion that could be made at town meeting where the money ends up going when it has a program that we have to approve in lieu of, something of that nature. We can make that clarification if it isn't there. That's something that we already can do at town meeting in terms of the debate. But what I was trying to focus our attention on is the actual expenditure of money. If an article is expending money and it's asking town meeting in a fiscal year, that needs to go to FinCom. And then not to window shop on where you want to take your article. That would be something that the finance director and the moderator would do in consultation with the finance committee in committee of precinct chair. You know, those four make the decision where things are going.
Well, we've vetted this, but I don't think we've decided. Why don't we put this one
Just one last thing,
on
if
the
I may,
table until next week?
Mr. Chair. Not to muddy the waters, but there may be some articles that FinCom and COPC might vet. And I see, you know, like that article you were talking about, that there has to be something in there that says, yeah, it's a FinCom article, but COPC should be involved in it in some way or form. And then through the process, it might be, you know, FinCom, I'm sure there's plenty of articles that FinCom doesn't want. But, you know, through the process, I think that it would come out who would bring that to town meeting. It just, not to muddy the waters, but.
I don't think we can stop any committee
Right.
from making a recommendation. So the idea that there might be two different committees, I mean, we're forgetting about the third committee, that is to say, the select board, who frequently, or on occasion at least, makes recommendations, brings articles before town meeting. So it seems to me that we want to assign this, assign each article to some committee. We need to come up with the mechanism of doing that, but we should be aware that just because that committee has that assignment, that does not preclude other committees from weighing in.
Right. Yes. How's that? Okay. Pardon me? Betsy?
May I read what Burlington has in their bylaws on this? It says,
Burlington, you say?
Burlington, Massachusetts. It says, "The town meeting shall by bylaw provide for the establishment of standing committees, a majority of the members of which shall be composed of persons elected to the town meeting. The Finance Committee in existence when this act takes effect shall continue as a standing committee on ways and means, and all articles which would require the expenditure of town funds shall, before enactment, be referred to the Ways and Means Committee for its recommendation." And then it goes on to say, "Such other committees as town meeting deems expedient shall also be created, and said committees shall be assigned all articles, the subject matter of which comes under their jurisdiction before final action is taken for a recommendation." So they're saying what Larry's saying. I think that there could be other committees that are assigned articles that do not require the expenditure of town funds. So the expenditure of town funds is how Burlington defines the
I'll
finance
go
committee.
back to Collins people this week and see if we can get a little more guidance and look at a few charters ourselves to see how they handle it. But we need something that's going to be definitive in the charter, not wishy-washy. And I don't think we're ready yet to put this one to bed.
And we all should be thinking about the name, the Finance Committee, Finance and Advisory, in terms of Ways and Means. Now that there is a participation from the legislative body in this process, it's more of a Ways and Means Committee than it is a Finance Committee. So it might be a need to address the name as Dartmouth is referencing it that way also. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? I was just saying that one of the things that we might need to address is the name, that it's really not as Finance Advisory, but more as Ways and Means, as Betsy just pointed out, how Dartmouth references their committee looking at financial articles as the Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah, I like the name change too. It's going to bring more attention to it. You know, this is a new charter. We're really, you know, taking a new look at everything, and you know, changing the name is going to draw more attention to it. You know, address it more appropriately and I think make it more effective.
Okay,
I think it's important to note that according to the Burlington Charter or bylaw, it says that the Finance Committee shall continue as a standing committee of town meeting. And it's called the Ways and Means, on Ways and Means.
should be considered as what?
It says the Finance Committee shall continue as a standing committee on Ways and Means, and all articles which would require expenditure of town funds shall before enactment be
That's-
referred to
you're
the
looking
Ways
the
and
other
Means
direction.
Committee.
I can't hear what you're saying.
So it's a standing committee of town meeting.
Right.
And it says it's going to be composed of persons, the majority of the members shall be composed of persons elected to the town meeting.
Yep, the Burlington Charter's got some really far-out provisions, one of which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. So we do have that question and how it's handled, and I guess the follow-up question would be if the articles that the COPC does here, do they have to prepare a written report to town meeting? So I don't know if that's in COPC's thinking. I think Larry's suggestion that both committees may want to report on it, maybe what the Collins Center are going to tell us next week, that either or both can report on it, but we need some further discussion.
May I say one more thing, Bill? I'm sorry, but the moderator that we have right now doesn't allow a person to speak twice until everybody else has spoken. So if we want the Charter Commission, I'm sorry, the COPC chairman to be able to speak more than once, then that would have to be provided in some way, that they would have an opportunity to make a recommendation on articles. Do you understand what I mean?
Betsy, you're referring to the moderator's ruling that you can only speak once? I think that shouldn't have bar a chair like the COP chair to speak more than once at town meeting.
Right, but if we,
Because just to clarify.
Right.
Because I think that instead of FinCom bringing every article before a
Right.
town meeting, I see COPC
Oh, absolutely.
standing up
Right.
alternately going, COPC brings this to
Yeah.
town meeting.
but that has to be written down. But the moderator may not allow it.
Well, no, because they're not, the ruling of the moderator has to do with discussion on an article. The
No, I agree. We should- it'd be
COPC
good to
would
put
be
something in
bringing
here.
that article to town meeting. It's
If
not a
it's-
discussion, it's just like FinCom stands up there and says, Article 12, we voted 13-0-0 like we always do. COPC is gonna say, Article 12, we voted whatever, and we bring this before. So that wouldn't have anything to do with them.
My point is that unless it's written down, the moderator doesn't have to agree.
Yeah, we'd have to make I think Betsy's gravitating to this idea that we'd have to make some provision in the charter, so it wasn't at the pleasure of the moderator, that FinCom will present, like it does, the Ways and Means would present its, the articles it reviewed, and then standing next to him as a second podium where the Committee of Precinct Chairs is going to present, we voted 5-1, and this is the reason, same thing they do.
Bill, I think when you're talking with Collins, I think it's important to talk to them about the fact that the Advisory and Finance Committee appears in Mass General Law. And so before we eliminate the name, I think we've got to be careful.
Okay.
If we're trying to keep the function, we might want to keep the name.
Right.
I think what I was saying is, if you look at Burlington, as Betsy was reading it, they make reference to this Ways and Means, but they also mention the Finance Committee.
Okay, so let's see, picking up the two sections, then further going on in the chapter 2 is 2.2-6. That language is as it always been with respect to town meeting. That hasn't been changed. And provides for the caucuses and how the caucuses work.
Bill,
Yes,
one question, 2-6-4 says that the precinct chairperson shall meet together within
Right.
45 days, and it doesn't. Oh, sorry. It's 2-6-4 says that basically, it's talking about the Committee of Precinct Chairs.
right.
And it doesn't say how they come to meet. And I think that this year, when we had reorganization. And my friend who was in Precinct 5 is now in Precinct 15, and there are people in Precinct 18 who
Yeah,
were
ain't been
God knows
elected.
where before. We need to make a statement of who calls the first meeting. So, because they don't have a chair yet, the COPC.
No, okay. I remember the first time that the precinct chairs met. Right after the election, a couple of us called each other, and we said, should we meet in the Manomet Library?
Well, I mean, I agree, but.
And we
you know,
did.
But didn't
It
we-
seems to me that
No, I agree. We
again,
should
the
put that in.
obvious person is the clerk.
That's what I was going to say, the clerk, because
But.
Pearl
but
had done
it
that.
should be specified.
I agree, I think.
Yeah, I'm not clerk.
I
Until
agree.
the committee formally meets, I know that's how Pearl recently did it. I forget what it was, what group was meeting. She called the first meeting. I know that, Larry, you've called first meetings before. I think that's the simple language you put in there. The clerk would call for them to meet within 45 days.
That, Larry. Right. So that's 2.6. 2.6 is basically this current language. 2.7,
Mr.
Uh,
Chairman?
yes.
I have a,
Before you leave 26-4, why does it have to be 45 days? Why can't it be 30 days?
There is an inconsistency in the charter right now we have to fix between the 30 and the 45. That's already been pointed out.
Okay, so
I'm
we're going
not
to,
sure this fixes it. I gotta go back and look at the 30-day provision.
we might change this to
We've gotta
30
make
days
sure it
then?
works.
Okay.
I agree. Because that's 50 days from the election.
Right, we'll fix that.
also 263, it says that each precinct chairperson shall arrange for a posting of notices of the caucus meeting in town
Yes.
hall and on the town's website. Don't we use civic clerk for all of that?
They no longer, there
I'm
was
not
an,
going down to town hall and posting a notice.
yeah, I think there was an article at town meeting, Larry could probably speak to this. It was an article that changed, we used to go to town hall and go stamp and put it on a bulletin board.
Right.
And then there was an article at town meeting that would not be the official notice, that we were moving to an online system, and we've been on that online system for some time.
This was the
How-
language.
So we should bring that back.
Do you know what the language is now in the charter? This was in there when we finished the last go-round.
I think that this is the language from the charter.
Right.
There's
It says
another
it is.
problem.
Yeah, that
There are
says
two
it's-
sentences and two
says-
problems. The
Right.
the Mass General Law's open meeting law exempts town meeting and its sub-bodies. So therefore, the second sentence is meaningless and should be eliminated.
Well, let's check that. That
Yep.
actually happened since the last charter. That got clarified, and all of a sudden, open meeting law no longer applied to town meeting.
No,
And
it-
its sub-caucuses.
It
Well, we
didn't
always thought
because
it
it's the legislature.
Right, I
There's
know.
an exemption for all legislatures and town meeting qualifies.
It's kind of, but Larry, it did change sort of the perception we had sitting out there, carrying out the local caucuses and stuff, that we were subject to the open meeting law. And all of a sudden, we were told, nope, you don't have to do that anymore.
Yep, not sure who told you the first one.
That's it.
Because it's, you know.
Well,
I mean,
I think it is interesting that if you don't make it onto civic clerk, it's not an official meeting, right? It's almost like, even as I understand it, if you put it on a bulletin board in town hall, but don't put it on civic clerk, it's not official. Right
So,
now.
Larry, just to clarify, are you satisfied if we have a provision here that it has to be posted regardless of whether we're subject to the open meeting law or not? That just as between us citizens in Plymouth, we believe that a caucus should be posted in advance.
Yeah, posting is a good idea. The other parts of the open meeting
Okay.
law, not so much.
Betsy?
Yes, on 2-6-3, I think it would be good to say each precinct chairperson or their designee. So, because it could be the vice chair. Yeah, it could be the clerk, or, it could be the secretary, it could be the vice chairman.
Is your point where it says each precinct chairperson shall do it?
3-6-3, each precinct chairperson or their
So
designee.
you want to add "or their designee"?
Or their designee, yes. And also, just as an aside, I had suggested to Bill a while ago that maybe representative town meeting is different from open town meeting in terms of open meeting law, where we are elected. not by state statute, but perhaps we would want to put something in the charter that says that our town meeting is subject to open meeting law. I don't know if we can do that, but I don't see why we couldn't. And
Well, I mean, you can make a rule, but you can't say it is under the open meeting law, because the open meeting law is very clear. It doesn't apply. So if you want to put something into the charter that would apply, you'll have to come up with some specific
different name.
language.
It would be
that
like the
we're
conflict
opposing.
of interest rules, which we're not subject to in the state, but Plymouth decided it made sense to do it here in Plymouth.
We should have rules. One of the things I noted in caucus meetings is they're arbitrary in terms of the rules applied, and that can often be very disenchanting to the public when they show up and they're told, you're not going to get a chance to speak, you're not going to do this or that, and it seems contrary to the spirit of town meeting. So I think we should have rules that have a minimum level of participation with people that are showing up. I know that can be a little burdensome, but at the same time, I think it's really important.
I agree
Just to
with Frank
Frank's
about
point-
of the outcome, but I wonder if this is better as a bylaw than as a piece of the charter.
How does the charter read?
Just to Frank's point, the COPC has been working on having a uniform caucus, having rules that every caucus goes by. So they have been working on that.
That's great.
Maybe you put that with the committee precinct chairs, where you put they establish the rules. Because Frank is right, because it's some caucuses are, they're very transparent. They want you to come in, they give you time. Some say, no, we don't want to hear from you, it's just us to get together. The true intent of the caucuses, the true intent of the caucuses were not only, the spirit of forming caucuses and requiring caucuses was not only to get town meeting members to open the book and start discussing the articles, but letting constituents come in precinct by precinct and engage their public elected officials. So to enhance transparency, you would change the language for the first time around this subject matter, where the committee of precinct chairs would establish a policy for caucus meetings.
Because COPC has been working on it. One of the things that they came up with was you have to have public comment. They also said that you should have your caucuses at the polling place because it's a public place and you can't have it in a private residence.
like a restaurant.
Give them the power to enact this rule or not enact it. I don't feel comfortable with that for the reason that Frank stated, that you could get into a wrangle at the COPC level with some of our caucuses that don't seem to want to exercise free speech or whatever. I mean, I've been to caucuses to present articles where I've been told I can't speak on the article. And I think that, I think something like that is serious, and I think we should, I'm in favor of putting it in the charter, rather than see if COPC can sort it out among your various caucus heads.
I would think, personally, I would think that you should put something in the charter but I would say that it's under the jurisdiction of the COPC.
Oh, yes, COPC,
Because we've
right.
already started working on that.
Right.
And I think you're talking about one precinct that just got broken up,
Right.
that's why they got broken up, and all of those people are not rerunning. That's why there's only 5 people running in that.
No, I agree, COPC is supposed to set rules for that sort of thing. Betsy?
I'm sure we'll come back to this, but even though we won't call it open meeting law, I hope Larry will indulge me to call it open meeting law information or practice or whatever. But another thing that concerns me, and again, just for the commissioners to be thinking about for when this actually comes up as a topic, is debating by email. That I think debating should all take place in public, that it shouldn't be happening by email.
Right.
And so, so I think, because I think all debating should be public, and emails are not all public. So I don't know exactly how we will talk about that.
That used to be one of our, certainly stronger than a guideline for all the years I've been a town meeting member. We kind of knew that, it was stated. I have to say, Larry, that at some point in the past 20 years, the Attorney General put out a memo, because I remember it's coming back to me now, a memo of what our responsibilities were as town meeting members. And it definitely was on the open meeting type thoughts. And whether it was And I think it may have been the predecessor of our current Attorney General. I'm thinking. it was
COPC
Martha-
for
it was
tonight.
Coakley.
I imagine, but just this is to have for some future discussion, what would go into the charter in terms of what.
So I think if the commission feels it's a good idea, we may have other ways of getting it into the charter, even if we're not forced to do it by the state.
Well, I was thinking at some point when we're talking about eligibility for and requirements for town meeting members, especially new town meeting members, that, they take that conflict of interest and the open meeting law and whatever sort of training and guidelines and kind of sign off and are trained, and that's part of their being sworn in, is that they have to acknowledge the rules under which they are representing their precinct.
Can you imagine the congressmen who have an idea for a law, or state reps, state senators who are trying to pass a law, not being allowed to speak with their fellow state reps? I mean, I understand the idea of, we're very careful as a charter commission, because those rules govern us. But legislatures are different, and the idea of telling a town meeting rep that he can't go and gather 8 or 10 of his friends and hold signs on something that's coming before town meeting.
The abuse was that 3 or 4 town meeting members in a particular precinct would make a decision, basically, through debate, and then finally decide it on the phone before we ever met with their fellow town meeting members. It was all done in secret.
Well understood, but there are 162, and therefore they might have
okay.
made a decision for their own
But it's-
caucus, but they're certainly not, we're protected against
Right.
that. So I mean, we can go forward with this, but I'm finding it hard to imagine codifying.
Larry, what I'm talking about is when somebody sends an email to every town meeting member, 180 town meeting members, of debate. But that, I think, probably is best to take place in public, not in email. So we can discuss it again. I think we need to stay on COPC, and we got into this because of 3.3-6-3, posting notices, but probably we may want to keep going with 2-7, Committee of Precinct Chairs.
No, this is, obviously, we want to have more discussion on the open meeting law, how we, but not the law, Larry, if it doesn't
Right,
apply
if
to,
I could
but,
just suggest.
but the
exactly-
provisions.
Exactly what you're saying.
Right.
If I could suggest that while this idea is tempting, anyone who has this idea, put it down on paper and circulate it through Michelle to us, and let's see if we really can come up with something,
Right.
or if we're just saying, wouldn't it be nice?
Right, yep, and then we'll see if we have a consensus of the commission.
Yeah, it sounds like a
Sounds,
plan.
makes sense.
If I could just come back to 262, when I rejoined you, you're talking about timeframes. Were you adding a time frame for when the caucus meeting needs to happen?
30 days.
Okay, good. That was one of my notes.
20 for the caucus,
Thank-
David.
Right,
and-
thank you.
and
262,
20 for
30
the
days
caucus
from
and
when?
30 for the Committee of Precinct Chairs.
David, what was your suggestion on 262?
Well, just that we define a time frame. Each
What is the-
precinct
all right.
delegation shall hold a caucus meeting for the purposes of reviewing the subject matter of the upcoming, 2 weeks before. I wanted to give a time frame that each caucus should occur.
But what's, why the constriction? I mean, whether it's 2 days before or 2 weeks before, why does that make a difference?
It doesn't, it's kind of like no less than. I want to make sure that each caucus is given the information prior to the meeting, not just the day before.
David, I'm just not sure why you need it there, because obviously there has to be an upcoming town meeting. So that starts the possibility of a caucus, and it has to be accomplished before the town meeting. So why isn't that the timeframe?
I just thought it might make, because there's a time frame already established about when information should be provided, and you don't want to have your caucus before that information comes. And to my mind, you don't want to have it one day before. You probably could. It's implicit there that it's happened timely, but I thought it wouldn't hurt to put within time, 2 weeks
I just think that putting in
Right.
time periods when we don't necessarily need them is just making trouble.
It hasn't been a problem. It's never been a problem.
Mr. Chair, that through
Especially.
COPC right now, there's, the chair of FinCom kind of regulates that timing, because he says, if you don't have it within this time frame, I'm not going to send any of my FinCom people to your caucus. And also, most of the chairs try to make sure we have a book in hand before we have the meeting.
Right.
And we like to have it, at least the week before, previous to the week before a town meeting. So I think, although, I think there should be something, but I think it gets regulated through COPC anyway.
So is the consensus to put in a time requirement or not?
I don't think it's ever been a problem. I don't know.
The only example the only example that I could see, for the longest time, Precinct 2 would meet the morning of town meeting in the cafeteria at the old high school. Remember that? That went on for a number of years. There was examples where Precinct 2 was, eventually they just teamed up with another precinct, but it was the language, I believe the chairperson of that was an attorney, and he once said to me, well, there's no language here that pertains me from having this the morning of town meeting, having a
Let's,
caucus. So we might have to put some language, a window, like David Peck is indicating, that this is when this is when the caucuses will happen, 14 days before town meeting, because that backs up to the other language that pertains to FinCom has to have their books in the mail by a certain date. So we don't want someone to deliberately,
But I mean, Bill, we need to make a decision one way or the other, whether we put in a time thing. My only point is that if anything is self-regulating, this is, if we have a precinct chair who waits until the morning of town meeting before they call a caucus, I certainly wouldn't want him to be my precinct chair in the next year. I mean,
but he stayed, he was the precinct chair for many years. I'm only pointing it out. Betsy's saying I don't remember a circumstance, because I'm stalking of caucuses for my articles. I have noticed this over time with this one precinct, and it was pointed that the language was silent on this matter and allowed them this flexibility to do it this way. I think that lacked transparency.
Bill, I think you're right, and I agree with Betsy. We haven't, I mean, if there's one problem, let's solve that problem by choosing a different precinct chair.
Right.
And this is one where, basically, I think the purpose of the caucus is to inform town meeting members before town meeting, and it's been working.
Okay, I don't feel strongly. I just threw that out because, there's some degree of flexibility about, they can be early and they can be late. But
Okay,
if it's self-regulating, I'll let it go.
so this 2-6, I'll make the changes that I can during this coming week that I think everybody has agreed to, and we can continue to discuss it next week with the Collins people when they come. But I get a sense of several of the things we need to change in that section. The next section, 2-7, is the new language for the COPC. It says it's a standing committee of town meeting. Yes, Dave?
Before you get in too far, on 273, the committee shall make recommendations, not may. And on section 276, shall make appointments to the advisory, not may. And the other ones, I think we can leave the word may, but that's my
So
opinion.
2, 7, 3, and 6, you want to change may to shall,
Yes, and the same with 276, shall,
in 2 places.
yes.
All right, got it.
Do you want to add at town meeting? Or do you want to add, in other words, when and how should they make these recommendations to town meeting? It doesn't say when or how. In other words, we know that advisory and finance are going to give us a book, and they're going to talk at town meeting. But this doesn't say when the committee of precinct chairs or how they're going to make the recommendation. So it might be important to say that. I don't know.
You You would have to say something now.
Go ahead, Larry.
I'm not sure that, is it very specific right now that FinCom's recommendations, how they're published?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it seems if we can put wording in if we need to, but I'm believing that the book that comes out of the finance department will, instead of being just it's not even just FinCom's book, it's FinCom plus the select board, and now it will be FinCom, the select board, and the committee of precinct chairs. We can, I mean, if we need words, we can put them in, but it seems
I think we do need the
obvious.
words, because
Gonna-
then there's no argument about it. And I think that this would also allow the committee to make recommendations at town meeting, if we put in at town meeting.
You're gonna have to put language in there. If we are actually going to move these types of articles over to the FinCom, they have to have a similar procedure of presenting that information at town meeting, and it has to be written out, so there's no, we're not silent on this matter, it's written out, and it's not the interpretation of a moderator or someone else, on someone else.
Yeah, it
So
can't
we'd
be-
have to put some language in there.
I would
If
like
they're
to see
gonna
that
formally hear these articles, they need to formally present the articles.
And then there would be no open to interpretation kind of problem.
Okay, so we're back to 2-7.
Well, before as well,
Just
before town.
Larry,
minor,
Just
but,
like FinCom.
but it come
Same.
back to haunt us.
That
In 2-7-1,
yep,
the word "who's" in the second line
right.
doesn't refer to town meeting, I think. I think it refers to the committee of precinct chairs. So we need to just rework the sentence so it's clear.
Yeah, it's clear that the sentence reads, "The Committee of Precinct Chairs described in the section shall function as a standing committee of town meeting whose purpose is to establish legislative branch continuity between town meeting and provide a voice for the legislative branch as a co-equal branch of government." I think that was a quotation from Mr. Brewster.
Good
Anyways.
quotation, but just need to
But I agree, we need to show
rework
that
this.
it's the Committee of Precinct Chairs that's the body that we're talking about there. All right, number 2. 2-7-2, this is further language that we asked for, which is now they're suggesting it be incorporated here. In furtherance of its purpose and function, or mission, the committee shall keep town meeting informed about warrant articles, make recommendations concerning town meeting rules and procedures, facilitate oversight of articles passed by town meeting, review town bylaws, and participate in such other matters as the town meeting shall deem appropriate. Some of that's existing language, some of that is new, and some of it is further elaborated as we get a little further along here in the charter. The next,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Cohan.
Facilitate oversight of articles passed by town meeting. I feel that's weak. This is a real,
Bill, I can't hear you.
oh, I can't, I'm sorry you can't hear me, I'm talking into the microphone.
Yep.
As best I can. This facilitate oversight of an article passed by town meeting. That's
Right.
the legislative oversight, and it needs to be a
We have a
great.
whole section coming up that talks
Okay,
about
all right, all right. I'll
this
stand
will-
down. I stand down.
They've incorporated a whole brand-new section that
Okay.
is the oversight section.
Okay, very good.
I think we need an adjective in front of the word warrant in 2-7-2. Do we mean accepted warrant articles or past warrant articles? Shall keep town meeting informed about warrant articles that have been accepted or voted for?
So Betsy, what is the change that you're looking for?
Well,
It says informed
warrant
about town
articles
meeting
can be
articles?
before town meeting, or they can be after they were passed. I think we mean after they've been accepted here, right? No?
Passed, passed. Passed is when they got affirmative vote. Now we're going to follow them.
Yeah.
That's what I think. We want to, maybe
So you wanted
word in
something
there.
like informed about past warrant articles?
Yeah,
something like
or
that? Okay.
accepted warrant articles or
But that
voted.
doesn't make sense. On the next number, they're making recommendations about warrants upcoming.
Right, that's what I'm
So
saying. They
it's-
should be both should be there, but.
Where are you? Can you just
I
help
mean,
me
it
out?
seems if you don't make the change, it applies in both categories, right? So there's, I don't
So-
see the harm.
I
So
think that two
Betsy, are you on
refers-
that sentence I just brought up about facilitate oversight of articles?
That's right.
Passed.
Right.
Passed would be the word for the action
Passed
of
by
town meeting.
The same thing, warrant articles that have been passed
Yeah,
by town
okay.
meeting.
Passed is fine.
So you're suggesting past articles passed?
No, it just, that's fine, we're not gonna, that means
But-
passed, so I think Betsy,
Okay, so
Wait a minute,
so-
how are those two things different? Shall keep town meeting members informed about warrant articles and then facilitate oversight of articles. I think that's the same thing. I think we're being redundant.
oh
No?
my God, no.
No, because I see it as
Yeah,
informed
yeah.
about warrant articles.
Yeah.
And facilitate oversight is the oversight. And, no, it's not. Why, isn't it?
Just leave it
Sorry.
on. Just leave it on.
Yeah,
all the
just
time.
leave it on.
Speak up.
Because you've got informed about warrant articles. That's basically what COPC does now. And facilitate oversight of articles is totally different.
But you got both in the article, so. we're-
Right, no, she
covered.
was saying that
Right.
she thought they were the same thing, and I'm saying those are totally two different
Right,
things.
so you got one sentence says one thing, and
Yep.
next sentence says the other, so
It was just,
covered, right. And then 273 would read, the committee shall make
Okay.
recommendations to town meeting on all warrant articles that it deems to be non-financial, but that's subject to the language we're going to review again. About who determines that?
So did we agree to put the words passed by town meeting after the word warrant article before make recommendations? So in other words, shall keep town meetings members informed about warrant articles passed by town meeting, make recommendations concerning, facilitate. Did we agree to put that in there?
No, because it has facilitate oversight of articles passed by town meeting, it's in there. Like Wrestling was
Okay.
indicating above, the language pertains to, it pertains to the normal interaction that the town meeting members have with articles and caucuses, where town meeting is gonna facilitate this warrant and these articles in doing that. Then it's comma, they're also gonna facilitate oversight of articles passed by town meeting. It's segregated out
Okay.
for its
So
importance.
have we got any changes yet in 272? We're all set, okay. 272, that's the one we're talking about. Bear in mind, there's a whole page devoted to the oversight coming up.
All right,
Okay,
okay.
273 was to make recommendations, that's subject to the whole point about who's going to decide what's financial. So 274,
I was wondering on this, for this consent agenda,
Yes.
should that be somehow, roll in the role of the moderator here? Because the moderator has to sort of present things. Because right now, it's done by what, town manager and select board?
town manager, yes. I don't know.
But I was wondering,
I'm not sure.
the relationship to the moderator.
We should debate that. I don't think the moderator knows what the town meeting really necessarily wants to discuss. I'd like to have more of a town meeting function here, decide what's going to go in the consent agenda. You know, the moderator may have his own priorities of speed and efficiency and all that. And there may be town meeting members who want to hear some of these articles that are in the consent agenda. And I think the only way to see that is to have COPC have its hand on it.
I
Wrestling.
totally agree with you. I would look towards our past couple town meetings where
Right.
town meeting had no appetite
Right.
for consent agendas.
I was totally,
And
personally,
I think that, personally, I think consent agendas, I think town meeting wants to hear every
Right.
article. And I think we should shy away from consent agendas.
yeah, Wrestling, I agree with you. And when I saw this provision, I said to myself, where did this come from? Because I don't remember suggesting
Yeah, we didn't talk about it.
to call this a consent agenda, because
where did
for
that
the
come
reason
from?
you stated, that in the consent agenda, the last two times they tried it, were some articles that were interesting to town meeting members.
So
And who
this-
makes that decision?
Mr.
And you
Chairman,
only save a few minutes.
Mr. Chairman?
Let's see, Larry and then Bill.
Seems, as clerk formerly, and sadly, one more time, I think, if I'm elected. I think that the idea of a consent agenda for certain articles, the Chapter 90 monies that get passed every time and just take some time. But if town meeting doesn't want an article in there, they need preparation. So the idea I have is that as part of the book that is sent to town meeting representatives 14 days before town meeting, there could be a proposal in that book for a consent agenda. And the moderator could then inquire, as we have this here, it will save time. And there's nothing wrong in saving time when there's unanimity and articles that are there just for that purpose. But just a thought.
Okay.
Then-
So we need to really do everything we can to direct, if we're going to, town meeting form of government needs to be as transparent as possible. Town meeting has voiced its concerns about consent agendas. I don't know how this got in here. I don't remember talking. How did the Collins Institute put this in here?
I thought it was an idea that, no, we
I don't know, remember even talking about consent agendas, because we're not really into them. And I'm not really overwhelmed by the time. I mean, you have a warrant, you have articles, there's a petitioner, they should present the article, and we should debate it. Time is something that we have. I don't want to say, oh, it's too much time.
My suggestion here, just one point, and then let's take a vote. This particular provision did provide for unanimous vote of the precinct chairs to prepare this consent agenda, for whatever that's worth. But I sense that consent agendas isn't really something many of us like or think really works. I mean, even, whatever article you mention, I could make an argument why I'd like to hear that article. I mean, the Chapter 90 monies, for example. I might want to hear how much Chapter 90 monies we have and how it could be made available. Betsy?
Yes, I agree with Bill on transparency. I think we need this to be as public a meeting, town meeting to be as public as possible. And because we now have electronic voting, we can take more time talking about the consent agenda, whether we want it or not,
Right.
what should be included, than it takes to vote on the
So
article.
let's somebody make a motion to
I move we
eliminate the
remove the
consent.
consent agenda from this.
Okay, is
entire-
that seconded? Wrestling moves that we remove the concept of a consent agenda 27-4.
Second.
Seconded? Any discussion? All in favor?
Oi.
Looks like the commission is on record to,
No, it's not.
No, I'm
voting
sorry.
nay.
we have one negative.
Thank you.
Scott, did you vote which way? Yeah,
I was with everybody but Larry.
your hand was up, right?
Yeah.
So one opposed and everyone else in favor. Okay, great. Thank you. So, next item was 27-5. The committee may, with a 2/3 vote, recommend to the select board that the board call a special town meeting within 10 days. 30 days,
30
excuse me, I misread that, 30 days.
Is there a stronger word than recommend? That's my
We'll
only,
find out.
that's
We
my
asked
only
the question
concern.
last week, and they didn't answer it, because I think I asked whether they could say, call a meeting, and they.
I
didn't
I
really
don't
get an answer.
necessarily want them to, I don't want to use the word demand, I don't want the, required, but I just wonder if there's a better word than recommend that is like strongly recommend?
And change it to.
Yes.
The committee may, with a 2/3 vote, request the select board call
I
a
like
special
that.
town meeting.
I like that, Frank,
What
thank
was
you.
that, Frank?
Well, I'm changing the sentence a little bit. It's a little obtuse the way it's written, but well, it says, recommend to the select board that the board call it, So I'm saying, the committee may, with a 2/3 vote, request the select board to call a special town meeting within 30 days.
I like that.
So recommend becomes request?
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
May I ask, Larry, how many residents does it take to petition the select board to have a town meeting, special town meeting?
200.
The committee of precinct
200?
chairs. Wait, Betsy, you're saying, you think it should say petition?
No, she's totally different.
She
I-
asked if, she
I'm
asked
just
how many,
wondering,
how many voters it
Oh,
takes
okay.
to petition a town meeting. Can I
You can answer
I'm
that.
going to say one last time, I hope. The Department of Revenue considers many special town meetings to be a sign of weakness. I don't have an objection to special town meetings. I perfectly understand the special town meeting that we are facing in front of us. Up or down, there is a matter that has time frame reference to it. But encouraging special town meetings, I'd love to hear from my fellow members what the subjects are that would occasion a special town meeting that the select board wouldn't call on its own.
Well, did you see, just coming up here, actually, in a second, what the town of Burlington does? Burlington considers their town meeting perpetual, and they never adjourn it. They just say that it has to meet at least every 150 days, so that when they decide, to have a meeting, they have a meeting. And Collins Center just became aware of that, and they're checking to see if it's working or not working, or whatever. They got a special act, and that's in their special act. Wrestling.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we're looking at our form of government is the public doesn't feel that town meeting meets enough. And I think that this is a way, if we're creating the Committee of Precinct Chairs as a standing committee for town meeting, I think that this is something we should give them. I'd like to see town meeting meet more often. I think that Committee of Precinct Chairs has the pulse of, hey, this is an issue we should really, meet on. And I'm not saying that they can go to the selectmen, and the selectmen said, no, I don't think so. They can still do that. I don't foresee us, because of this, having a whole bunch of special town meetings, but I just think that this is an important part of giving the legislative branch its voice. And I think that,
I tend to agree with wrestling, because I think first of all, it requires a 2/3 vote. So it's obviously something that's going to be of great importance to the Committee of Precinct Chairs. It's a standing problem in Plymouth about how often town meeting meets, and I don't think we've ever had excessive specials. And some people are arguing that we don't town meeting. I mean, it's a big complaint against town meeting. It doesn't meet often enough. I'm not sure it'd be abused. Yeah, Larry?
I understand in a sort of vague, general way, people say town meeting doesn't meet enough without, I still haven't heard the issues that would cause. And one of my major premises, and we will get to this once we get to Select Board and Planning Board, is the concept of planning. And having more meetings does not mean more planning. I mean, one of the advantages of having a specific time for a town meeting is that it requires the departments in town hall, or the petitioners who are sponsoring articles, to prepare their information. And if you're saying, ooh, I have an idea, let's have a town meeting, it's really pretty quick. I mean, I think there are times when you need to have town meetings, emergencies of certain types, but I'm loath to promote the idea of having lots of town meetings because of the planning element that the town should be going through.
Bill?
So, one thing I do acquiesce to is that there's quite a few people out there that want to see a more robust legislative body and town meeting more often. So I recognize that, and I'm trying to find a way of accommodating that. It could be accommodated in these means. Because the other part of me is, wait a second, have I ever seen town meeting miss an opportunity? Have we had a town meeting where an opportunity was in front of us and town meeting couldn't act quick enough to digest that information and debate it and vote on it? We're going through a process right now where we're getting ready for a special town meeting on June 21st, and we're all scrambling to get the information, get it in front of FinCom, get it in front of the selectmen, get it to the caucuses, get it to town meeting. So that information is being compiled right now, and it's showing the flexibility of the legislative body. Always be careful about what you wish for, because it might come true, because the other thing that town meeting does, when they meet, they spend money. So it's nice to have town meeting over here and town meeting over here in a progress towards it in an organized manner. Rushing it is nerve-wracking. Right now, with this special town meeting coming up, I feel a little rushed. It's a little nerve-wracking. So yes, we have the ability to have a special town meeting, but at the same time, we want to be careful. I always say that, you know, town meeting, the more they meet, the more they're going to spend money. And one of the things that we want to do is listen to the voices out there of people wanting to see a more robust legislative body where town meeting has the flexibility to meet and meet this demand. But at the same time, I look back on my experiences with town meeting, trying to see if there's been ever an opportunity that we've missed as a town meeting. This might be a way of accommodating that language.
Well, if I could throw in one of the arguments, that I still have in favor of a council is because they meet far more frequently. One of the arguments against a council is, don't worry, special town meetings can be called whenever we need them. So you're sort of slightly arguing against yourself when you hear too many town meetings is not good. But in terms of, the financial timing of meeting more frequently, I hear Bill and I hear others, but we heard Dave Gould tell us at one of his hearing that there are grants that the town cannot apply for because the deadlines fall between town meetings. And we heard more than once, and I would say in terms, we've had multiple capital projects where a bid came in lower than needed, and we had to wait 6 months for the next time to replenish a project. It's happened more than once. So as you know, I'm a continued supporter of more frequent meetings. In the Charter Review Committee a couple of years ago, I was part of a small group that wanted to get 3 or 4 per year. I still would like to support the idea of at least 3 every 4 months, which would intercept things. We still have our annual in the late spring, but there are cases where more frequent standing meetings instead of special do make sense because inflation continues, and then changing circumstances, as this upcoming special town meeting tells us, do happen. And more frequent meetings mean that they don't have to be special town meetings. You can plan for them.
Okay, right, it occurs to me, right now, the select board can call a special town meeting whenever they want in 30 days. And all we're suggesting here is that the legislative branch have an equal authority to call a special town meeting, or, well, that's the question, whether they can call it or recommend it. But again, within 30 days, it's contingency planning. It doesn't mean we're going to necessarily have more special town meetings. I mean, it just elevates the COPC and the legislative branch to more of a co-equal standing with the executive branch. To me, it's kind of another aspect of checks and balances. And I think Plymouth is not known for having too many special town meetings. We rarely have them.
Mr. Chairman? I'll have to look at my old town reports from the 80s. I know there was one year we had 4 specials. I see this as being self-regulating because it says request. It doesn't say require, and I don't think it should say require. So I see this as being self-regulating. There have been missed opportunities. They could be possibly addressed by 3 town meetings a year, and we see it, Dave Peck and I, on the building committee, we see it because with the crazy situation with supplies these days, we have some roof projects we can't get shingles for. So yeah, I mean, you just simply can't get them. So I think it's beneficial to have this in, and it just gives another avenue to be able to call a special.
I think, I agree with that. So,
Yes, as for the idea of 3 or even 4 town meetings a year, you immediately hear the argument that it's too onerous to do that there's too much preparation and so forth and so on. But I would think that if you had more town meetings, you would be cutting down on how much goes into one of those town meetings. So you would have less, in other words, if it was decided ahead of time, okay, we're going to have 3 town meetings a year, then ahead of time, the executive branch and advisory and finance, or whoever we call them, could just set up, okay, we'll hear these projects, and then these projects, or
Right.
the third town meeting will be for, in other words, there'll be or say you had 4 town meetings. There'd be a spring and a fall town meeting, and then the interim town meetings would be if needed, or something like that. So, in other words, we could still continue the way we are with a spring and fall town meeting, but then there would be a scheduled town meeting that would be right in the middle, that would be called if there was a budget need, or a building need, or a capital need. So it would be already scheduled, or it could be like Burlington, where it's left open. But I think that if the executive branch and all the departments knew, okay, 3 months after spring town meeting, if I have an urgency, there's already a town meeting that could happen. I mean, maybe it could be set up something like that, so that it's not 4 big town meetings that are a huge amount of work, but.
well, I mean, a special's a special, but let's just take an expression of position on this particular item, whether the COPC, let's start with a 2/3 vote, could request that the select board hold a special town meeting. How many in favor of that? So I got
Oh, hang on,
2.
hang on, this is the word request, Frank's suggestion?
Request.
Okay.
Replace recommend.
So this is,
How many are in favor of it again, please?
So
3.
just to make sure, this is changing the word recommend to request.
Right, Frank's change.
Yes.
Yep, got it. 3 here.
And this means the select board can
Seconds.
say no.
Oh.
David Beck.
Yeah, they can.
Okay, everybody's, we have 1 opposed. You got it? Thank you. The language would read 2/3 vote, request
We
to the
don't want
select
the
board.
committee to be able to force the select board. Okay.
Next item is 276. The committee shall make appointments to the Advisory and Finance Committee as provided in section, so that'll be a cross-reference to the Advisory and Finance section, and to the Charter Review Committee, again with a cross-reference to the, whatever number that Charter Review section at the end of the charter ends up, and other committees as provided by bylaw or vote of town meeting.
Yeah.
I think it was proposed at the last meeting that the COPC have 10 nominations, and moderator would have 5.
Bill,
So we
may,
need
or did we change that to shall?
Yeah, I changed it to shall because that was David's change.
Yeah, he made that.
Yep.
He did say.
Got it. So let's see, 10 and 5 is 15. Are we going to increase that to 18? Leave the Finance Committee at 15? Okay, got it. Number,
It may be worth asking the Collins people, you know, how large are, you know, what's the range of FinCom membership? Because 18 seemed like it was getting big. I'm okay with 15, but was wondering whether other towns have an effective advisory and FinCom with 10 or 12 members.
Brookline, if I remember correctly, has 20-something. So you're right, there is quite a range.
Yeah.
I did, when Lynn Barrett was here during that night, I did ask that question about how big should the FinCom get. I think the Finance Department can, reach back out to that department, but it sounded like they wanted to keep it to 15.
Well, the reason I was asking is, you know, if you look at the votes across the last couple of town meetings, you know, it's rarely 15 votes. You know, it's 13, 12, you know, and I know there's turnover and stuff, but just whether it's, you know, a slightly lower number might be easier to keep a full committee rather than a 15. It's just a question.
Oh, I'd stay at 15. I wouldn't go lower than 15.
When you get to the Advisory and Finance Committee section, you'll see that the town meeting members are no longer excluded. I think
Right.
it reads that any resident or non-employee can be a member of the Finance Committee.
Where are we now?
I can't hear you.
I'm
We're
sorry,
still in
where are we
COPC.
now? I'm sorry, where are we now?
Right where we were,
I didn't see that language. I was just trying to follow this.
27-6, recommendations to the Advisory and Finance Committee appointments.
No, the 15 was meant to be representative of every precinct, and there's a minimum on that right now of 3, I believe.
Per
No
person.
more than 3, I mean, per precinct, because they know they can't always get that representation. But wouldn't we want to have 18 and still strive for that representation?
I don't know, but I did ask that question of Lynn Barrett. You can bring her back in and ask that question again. I asked her specifically about that.
I know, but she's speaking in terms of,
She indicated.
Frank, if we have, if we're allowing no more than 3 per precinct, I don't think that we're expecting 1 per precinct. I mean, if you
I mean,
want 1 per precinct, then let's say.
no, what I'm
1
saying, the intention, I know it falls short almost every time.
Right.
But I think the intention is correct, to try to have any board that's representing the elected or otherwise be representative of the community as a whole. I mean, we could easily end up with, 12 people from downtown, and that's not a good idea. I'm just-
Except that if we're giving the committee of precinct chairs, who by the makeup of the committee represents the entire town, 1 per precinct, it would be strange if they
Yeah,
did choose to give, all to.
I'm just saying in language,
So-
it's okay, it might be harmless to have a little language that the
If-
intent
if-
is.
The relevant section is 212-1 on page 6, and it says there will be 15 members, 5 appointed by the moderator, 10 by the precinct chairs for 3 overlapping terms, and no more than 3 per precinct. So how do you want to change that? It goes on to say that the number of incumbent members from a particular precinct increases due to redistricting or the change in residency. No incumbent member need be removed and may serve the rest of his term. Now, do you want to change this?
I can see where Frank's going with this, is all about representation, and problem is that the moderator has a tough time filling the 15. And I think that, if we went up to 18, we wouldn't be able to fill it. But I see what Frank's talking about, but I think that we should leave it at 15 because we can't fill what we got.
I give in.
May I speak, Bill? Actually, if we put in 18 and we didn't reach 18, it wouldn't be violating the charter. But I think that if, as someone said, with 18 members of the Committee of Precinct Chairs, they're going to know a lot more people than the moderator knows. They're going to have a lot more context than the moderator has.
I acknowledge it's a minor issue. And I bow to the wisdom of the many years of the board.
And I agree with what Wrestling was saying, is that sometimes there are only 12 people at the meeting or less. So, so I don't see any harm in going to 18, and I wouldn't see any harm in having a sentence that says something along the lines of, if one from each precinct if possible, or something like that.
Having presented to, I mean, we've all gone before Finance Committee and presented an article. I do believe that if you start getting up to 18 people, it becomes a little cumbersome. I would prefer that we stay for now at 15 town meeting members, 15 finance people on the Finance Committee. I think going to 18, I think we're going to be creating an issue that might be a little bit more daunting.
Make a motion.
So how many are in favor?
I would be glad to make a motion that we keep it at 15 and that we also have 10 appointed by COPC, 5 by the moderator.
Second.
David, what was the tail end of your motion?
That the mix be 10 of the 15 be appointed by COPC, 5 be appointed by the moderator.
So that's the way it currently reads.
Right.
So you're
So
in favor of
I'm voting to maintain that.
Okay, seconded?
Mr.
Any
Malgudi.
discussion? All in favor of David's motion? So it'll be 10 and 5? Got it, thank you. Total
Bill,
of-
do we want to continue
Total of 15,
discussing
David, right?
section
Yes,
12?
got it.
Yeah.
Advisory and finance, or
Bill.
we want to come back to that later?
No, no.
Bill,
Back to it, okay.
I think we're still on COPC.
Okay, very good.
Bill.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Abbott.
I'm going to start sending up flares. I know we're down in the weeds here and everything like that, but we're also into the agenda, the public comment period, so I don't know if we want to keep pushing through this, or if we want to stick
Can
to
we
our
take a break
schedule.
for public comment? Sure.
It's already time for public comment.
Right.
Wow.
So we reached a point where we will suspend the discussion briefly where we have public comment, it being time for public comment. Anybody has public comment? Mr. Hutchison? Yes? Joe, is your mic on?
Microphone.
Mike?
So I was going to talk on some other things, but in the discussion about frequency of meetings from David and Wrestling and others, I wish that someone who is, I keep hearing about this, and I never really see anything written down in the way of evidence that I would love it if somebody would actually make the case in writing and just for the benefit of the public. Because, the Burlington law would allow you guys to have a meeting that's standing all the time. And if you need to have an emergency, you could go ahead and have one. I mean, we have an emergency meeting right now, and Larry's point about preparation comes to play in spades on that, where we have a demand from some folks who want to use the training center as a fire station, and the other side of the argument being that Mr. Via is proposing a set of buildings that are going to just be terrible for the neighborhood. And preparation is everything. And you can see in this town meeting, we're being asked to look at something that's pretty absurd, really. And so, Larry's point about preparation seems to me to be very, very important. And I'd like to understand how more town meetings and all that they imply are important to town meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle, do we have anybody on Zoom? Okay. There being no further comment, that hiatus is over, so let's go back to our discussion. The moving along in chapter 2-7, there's a placeholder for any future powers or obligations of COPC. That's 27-7. And then the rest of it is the 277 is already, 278 is already in our charter about COPC making subcommittees. And 27-9 is suggesting that at least quarterly, the committee reports on its activities to all town meeting members, the moderator and the select board. I think currently it says, is it quarterly or annually? It's already in the charter. Wrestling, did you have some question?
Yeah, I'd like to nail it down that the COPC and the select board meet on such and such date, or, I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to, you know,
I mean,
because,
more often than,
well,
actually, we don't
Well,
have,
if it's in the charter now, it's not happening.
right.
But what I was gonna suggest is adding a sentence that shall meet quarterly with the select board. I mean, we've got other provisions where the planning board and the school committee are supposed to, you know, meet periodically with the select board. I'd like to put either a separate provision, separate from this reporting, but, you know, require them to meet quarterly with the select board.
Is that a consensus? Yes.
I think so. I think we spoke to,
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on it last
yeah,
week.
we were saying it needed to be much more forceful, that it wasn't just that they could speak with them, but they would have meetings, but also that they could request, maybe again with a two-thirds vote, that they have the opportunity when some critical issue comes up to be heard and not be just deferred or sent away. So that really needs to be strengthened up there, I think. I think it's a major component to the COPC having the authority or respect, whatever you want to call it, in this new charter.
I'd like to see something in the way of a joint meeting needs to be done between the select board and COPC. We could call it quarterly, but a joint meeting, you know, that's what, you know, the planning board and the school committee have. They have a joint meeting where they both have a meeting where they both call to order and they both, you know, discuss what's going on. And I like Frank's, you know, two-thirds of the committee could ask for an audience with the select board, but I think a joint meeting needs to
Frank,
happen.
suggesting it would read something like, not less often than quarterly or at any time with a two-thirds vote, the COPC
Yes,
requests such meeting?
yes. I have to say, I'm on the planning board. We have not had
Right.
one joint meeting this year in my time on the board. And I think we're supposed to have several.
Yep.
So that's another thing for the charter or enforcers.
Yeah. Take them out in handcuffs.
Okay, got it, thank you.
But we leave the moderator, when the town meeting members and the Board of Selectmen meet, we'll also include the town moderator in that process, right? We're not removing him from that? No, okay. He's part of town meeting, but we don't, he or she would be part of town meeting. We don't want the moderator part of that joint meeting? But right now, the language does have him in it, and 2-7-9 does, 2-79 does have him in there right now, it has the moderator in there right now. And I propose that we would probably want to keep the moderator part of this process, because he or she would be, you know, facilitating future meetings and should know of this
So it
interaction.
already,
I don't see.
I'd
him
leave
part
it
of
in,
the
I would leave the moderator into,
really leave it in.
yeah, I don't know.
So the only way 279 is going to get changed would be, it would add the feature that the select board would meet with the COPC when the COPC requests that with a two-thirds vote. Otherwise, the rest of it stays the same.
Hang on, well, why would?
Well, that's different. Reporting is just sending in a report.
Right.
We're talking
No,
about
there'd
meeting in
actually-
person.
No, there'd be a meeting, right. It
Yeah.
has to have a
I think
meeting,
we want to be clear and
that
have a
meeting
joint
component.
in there.
Yeah,
So
I would strongly recommend that we say quarterly, the committee of precinct chairs will have a joint meeting with the select board. And if two-thirds of the committee of precinct chairs see fit, they can request a meeting with the select board.
Above and beyond your.
Okay, so that wrestling is a different, right, be a different sentence altogether than what's there now.
Yes, I would say that. Yes, I
Okay.
would.
You're giving, you're not suggesting any sort of equality there. You might want to say two-thirds of the select board or two-thirds of the committee of precinct chairs can propose an additional joint meeting. It sounds like this, I'm sure you're not meaning to, but it's like the committee of precinct chairs is the supplicant asking the select board to have a joint meeting. If they're equal.
In the first part, no.
Yeah. if
In
they're-
the second part where I think there needs to be some mechanism, my wording might not have been what I wanted, but there needs to be some mechanism that, okay, the first part, quarterly, they're having a joint meeting, period, end of sentence, that's happening. It needs to be in the schedule, and the secretary of the select board puts it in there. Secondly, I want there to be some mechanism that the committee of precinct chairs can say, hey, look, we've got an issue that we need to go and speak with them.
I'm agreeing with you, but.
Again?
I'm suggesting that the select board might want to meet with the committee of precinct chairs. And
Yeah, they can do that
therefore,
anytime they want.
well, we're not talking about specific select boards and specific committees of precinct chairs.
Right.
I'm talking about if they're equal groups.
Yep.
You want to say two-thirds of either body may request that, rather than just the committee of precinct chairs, because the implication that the select board doesn't want to meet with the committee of precinct chairs has no place in the charter.
No, but first of all, select board, that would take 4 out of 5. I don't know how often they
That's
could ever
fine.
get 4 out of 5 for two-thirds, but I thought your issue was, why should the COPC have to get a two-thirds vote to request this meeting?
No, why is it only that the COPC wants to meet with the select board? Isn't it imaginable that the select board might want to solicit the information from the COPC?
That's fine, but let's take out the two-thirds requirement.
I have no comment on two-thirds either way.
Right.
You're looking for parity,
Any other points of view here, David? Majority, right, of either board decides they want to have a meeting, and they just ask for a meeting.
And it'll be a shall, not a request or
Yeah,
a
and
recommendation.
and this
Shall.
would be over and above the quarterly ones.
Yes.
So, so the language would say, any additional meeting between the select board and the COPC may be requested by a majority of either committee or something like that,
Correct.
either
right.
board.
Yeah, I think the first sentence has to stand by itself.
Yeah,
Right.
They
First
shall
sentence.
meet quarterly, period.
right.
And then, if either board by a majority feels that there's an issue that needs to come up, they can request a meeting.
Right, basically it'd be 2 sentences, because the first one has to do with the report.
Right.
And then the second will be the meeting.
We can ask Collins to make that sentence,
What?
make those 2 sentences.
Can't hear
Yeah,
Betsy?
she'd like Collins to.
Not quite,
Weigh in
Okay.
on
still
the
needs a
change.
little
All right.
massaging.
Very
Okay.
good, thank you. The Collins team notes that they're researching the potential for additional powers to be included for the COPC. I don't know what those might be. One of them is to, well, we already have the recommend the calling of a town meeting. We've discussed that, the appointments, right, creation. We're coming to the oversight committee, so I think that's it for this part of the memo.
Excuse me,
The
one
next
thing.
item in the
Bill.
memo,
On 279, at least quarterly, the committee shall report on its activities. Is that by email, or how are they going to do that report?
I think it's just a report.
So how are they going to do
I
that?
think they have to figure it out.
Okay, very good.
I mean, you know, we get too detailed here, but you just have to make a report. Whether they have to stand there and do it orally, I mean, I assume a report is something in writing, and whether it's sent by email as an attachment or sent through the US mails, it should work. The next item is the new warrant article oversight committee, which is brand new, and it's on page 4 of their memorandum.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, David?
in the interest of brevity,
What?
I'm going to say that I like the, the article, we're talking about the oversight committee. Okay, I'm on the wrong section. We'll let this one go.
Okay. Okay, they're proposing that a new committee be established called the Town Meeting Warrant Article Oversight Committee to track the status of articles passed by town meeting, comprised of 5 members, committee of precinct chairs to appoint 3 within 30 days following the close of annual town meeting, It would also consist of the town manager or his designee and the town clerk, or his or her designee. And appointments would be made within 30 days following town meeting by filing a notice with the town clerk. And the next section says that the committee has the power to interview a member of a multiple-member body or a town department head about a warrant article and request any information. And then provide 3 status reports to all town meeting members regarding the status of implementation of town meeting warrant articles. And they have these reports 60 days following town meeting, 180 days out, and then 300 days out. And at least twice a year, the committee of this particular 5-member committee and the select board would meet in a joint session to review the committee report and what's happened to these articles. If it shows that they're just sitting there and nothing's happening. So that would be the follow-up, but it puts the responsibility with the select board. Do we have comments on this section? Larry?
Bill, I'm just, I assume that what we're talking about is for each town
Yes.
meeting?
Right?
It sounds,
Each article within each town meeting.
right. I suppose it sounds so that there are going to be multiple reports because 180 days
Yes, they start to
following
overlap, right.
the springtime meeting is the fall town meeting, and it could get confusing the way it's described here, but
Right. Okay, Bill?
So, not in here, it's similar to the case of reporting, how we'll report by mail, by person, by email. The same thing is gonna apply here, that, you're going to, choose the best way of compiling this information and making it available. And what I have thought about it, I've thought about this long and hard, because one, I don't want to overburden a department, make them dragged away from what should be doing by preparing all this information. What we have the technology today to have a spreadsheet where the petitioner of the article would be required to go in and update it every 60 to 80, I want to look at these 60, 80, 180, and 300 days. It should be just every, in between each town meeting, there should be this mandatory updating by the petitioner. They'd go in and they would do the work to update this document that everybody could see and view to at least know what the status of that article is. This ability, I would ask the committee to just, I'm working on a spreadsheet example to see how this would look, but we wouldn't put it in the charter, but we know the technology's there to gather this information and track it over a period of time. So as the time in the years pass, you could go back to the 2022 and see the spring and fall town meeting and see the articles, all the articles that were presented, that were passed, and their status of them. So it would be a document that would just move through time. It's almost kind of like a very streamlined version of the annual report, but not the annual report. It's just simply listing what action happened at each town meeting in terms of what was passed and the status of that article.
Bill, this would give this committee the chance to use that
Technology.
spreadsheet suggestion. The reason they weren't suggesting putting it in the charter is that technology changes over time and
Correct.
may become obsolete as you develop a more
Correct.
May I ask a
efficient electronic way of doing it.
I think Betsy wants to talk.
May I ask a question?
Betsy?
So I'm thinking about, for example, the puppy and cat ban. Would that also be reported, or let's say a zoning change, is that going to also be reported through this?
Yes.
Where is the zoning change at this time? Where is the ban at this time? Are we thinking every article, or is the oversight committee going to choose which articles they want to have
Well, I think
oversight
the
on?
concept was it would be every article.
It would be a spreadsheet that shows, someone could
Right.
go to a town meeting and see consolidated all of the articles passed. Some of them are not going to need any input because it was a bylaw change that there'll be no puppy mills in town. So there isn't really any follow-up to that. It really is to these other articles, like a Stevens Field article.
Right,
Where
yes.
is the article?
Right.
know?
So do they actually need, do we need, I mean, couldn't the oversight committee choose which ones they
Well,
felt
I
needed?
don't, I get nervous about choosing, because now we're gonna go pick and choose. I think that that you would have there are certain articles that no one was really paying attention to over a period of time. That, let's say it was, we had a fire department that was coming before town meeting, asking for studies, asking for money to do roofs, and we were giving them the monies, and those monies were put out to bid, but nothing ever came of it. So this is a way of making sure that all the articles are accounted for, and you can see the status of that article. And then from there, the committee can then pick and choose what ones it wants to bring up.
I
But
see.
the
Okay.
information is all there, equally dispersed amongst all the articles.
So every town meeting,
Thanks again. I mean,
every town meeting will have a spreadsheet.
Right.
Article 1, Article
Correct.
2, Article 3, and then what happened. I
yep,
see.
yep.
Okay, thank you.
Larry?
I guess this can get a little bit voluminous. When an article is complete,
Yeah, then it
does it drop
falls,
off?
yeah, falls off the,
Well,
So it's,
right.
this is about taking advantage of technology that exists today. So we have a way of doing this in a very consolidated way, where we have the spreadsheet, and it has above it the status of it. At some point, it's gonna say closed out, completed by the planning. It will have an identification for that it's done.
okay,
But we're not going to put that specific little language in the board.
so,
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm
this
going to
is-
want to see how the language evolves, because I just don't want to have overburdensome 3 times a year or more reports. I like the idea of, something like no less than twice a year, the committee shall provide reports. Because I'm thinking, without mentioning the technology, Bill, because I'm not a techie, but Google Docs and I think Excel spreadsheets can be maintained, continuously and updated continuously. And then they could be periodically published or made available both electronically and hard copy. So,
okay, I think that,
but so the idea of, I've been troubled, I was last week too, by 60-day, 180 and 300-day reports. So I like your idea, Bill, of some way of the information being developed, being available in multiple media and, and updated periodically with at least some minimum required times to update them.
my concern is that there are going to be articles, let's give the town clerk new voting equipment. He buys the voting equipment, it's done in 60 days, we don't have to think about it again.
Correct. Yep.
Then there's another situation, we say to the fire chief, we're going to give you a steam-driven, horse-drawn carriage, and he doesn't do it in 60 days, he doesn't do it in 180 days, and he doesn't do it in 300 days. And my question is, we don't want to know any more about the town clerk situation, but 300 days turns out not to be enough for an article that's incomplete.
So
Okay, it doesn't have to be done
they
in
would be
300 days.
required.
But this only says that there are 3 reports. I think I like the idea, but I think that what we're trying to do is, we're trying to take articles that have been passed and haven't been dealt with, and we want to know about them even beyond 300
Right.
days.
There's a solution to that.
Okay.
Wesley?
Yeah, just to let y'all know what precinct chairs has done is they've tried to start this, and they pick a couple articles, Stevensfield, and they, get updates, and it's been difficult. When we were looking at this, David Gould sent me what he does with every single article, which was exactly what Bill's talking about. What I'd really like to see is I think that we need to get the department heads to get on board with creating something like this across the board, where, Committee of Precinct Chairs says, where are we on this article? Because what you said was, some of them were falling through the cracks. And I think that's really where precinct chairs can shine, because they can be sitting there going, hey, Bill, where are we on Stevens Field? Instead of waiting for, Bill to, get the money and get all the stuff and.
So wouldn't there be another category, Larry, that isn't in here yet? It would be these articles that have just gone beyond their term, and this is like a fourth category.
Until completed.
Right.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I mean, some, so,
That's my suggestion. that
yes,
we-
I think that makes sense.
But you have to have something in there that they don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
That steam engine that you just gave the fire department, why haven't you bought it? It's just like the electrician that we were supposed to hire 3 years ago.
Well, isn't that the purpose of the meeting with the select board?
But, okay, so as long as we add a category of until, and there will be a report until completed or reversed, that would
Right.
satisfy me.
Okay, got it. Bill?
Okay, he's satisfied, okay. So I think that what I was just trying to say is that we need kind of, it's like a quick reference archive. So you can go back to each town meeting and you can see what articles were passed, and there will be dates along the top in a box that you have to fill in. And all you have to simply do is say that if you have bought the equipment, you would simply just enter the equipment was purchased, and the account is closed out. And so then, as time passes, so you don't have to do anything beyond that point. Now it's just a dead article, because it's not a dead article, it's just been executed properly. These other articles that sit out there and there's no execution and the money's sitting in the account, the petitioner would be required to put information in there. And that's the canary in the coal mine that gives the committee the ability to pull people together and go, why is this not being acted on?
Bill?
Yes?
Would this include, I know that many things, not everything, but some of the things that are voted in town meeting need to be approved by the Attorney General. So
Right.
would there be something for that?
You would have the
Just-
box, you would just put in the
Right.
box, waiting for Attorney General to.
So you would include that?
That'd
You
be
would
in there,
include that in
yes.
there. And if it's a petitioned article like this special town meeting, we have a resident who has 2 articles.
Yep.
I think there's zoning changes. So then, who would be responsible for those?
They would, whoever petitioned the article would get an email saying, you're required to go in and update the status of this article,
Okay, thank you.
department head or petitioner.
So there's one other item before we adjourn. I want to bring up let's just take up the charter enforcement section, because we spent a lot of time discussing that. The Collins team had an introductory comment that it could create liability issues for Plymouth if we had a strong charter enforcement mechanism. They have looked at a lot of different examples, and they say some are either too weak to have an impact or too strong, they may create liability. But nevertheless, they've looked around to get some possible remedies for charter violations, and they propose 3 sample sections: Provincetown, Orleans, and Falmouth.
Mr. Chairman?
Somebody's,
Now I'm in the right section.
well,
And with for the purpose of brevity, I think we should go along with the Orleans Enforcement Act.
well, let's discuss each one of them before we start commenting on them.
I'm trying to alleviate that.
I mean, Provincetown is the first one here.
I think it's too complex.
Okay, well, let's see, let's look at Provincetown. They actually had a charter compliance commission set up that investigates a violation. It's a 3-member commission. Commission provides its own written interpretation of the charter and the written request of the resident or official. It's advisory only, right? The town manager is responsible to ensure that all department heads comply with the charter, and then the town manager determines an appropriate response. That's the longest one in words. The next one, which is very short, is Orleans. The selectmen just take it and do their own little investigation to enforce the charter. 10 or more voters can cause the select board to look into enforcement of the charter or obtain an opinion from town council. And the third example was Falmouth, where a written request is filed with the town clerk of circumstances of an alleged violation. And then there's a procedure where the alleged violator has to file a response with the town clerk. And it goes to the town manager and Board of Selectmen. But basically, all three of these don't have any specific punishments other than airing it, making it public, such that the employee or board or whatever can maybe suffer politically, not get reelected, or whatever. So that's the sort of thing they're suggesting here.
May I speak?
David, now go.
Okay, and again, I think the Orleans Charter section is the shortest and sweetest and to the point. It doesn't require the election of another commission or committee.
Yep.
It simply says 10 or more voters, and that's the key to the whole thing in my mind. Petition the Board of Selectmen for enforcement of the charter or to obtain a formal opinion from town council. And I don't know what we can impose as penalties. Legally, we probably can't impose any penalties, but this is short, sweet, and to the point.
Right.
So that's the section that I prefer.
Right. Okay. Other comments? The wrestling.
This is kind of what we got now, is somebody can complain, and the usual suspects stand up, and there's a whole bunch of people saying, you know, I'm not going to stand up because I'm going to get grief for this. I don't know how to do it, but I think there should be a committee, just because the committee could look into it, and they're supposed to be looking into it, as opposed to individuals standing up. You know, I give the example of Mr. Cirque trying to find out what was in the redacted notes. You know, it takes him doing that, and he's got a lot of guts to do it because a lot of slings and arrows came towards him. It's like the conflict of interest thing. I think if we leave it up to the individuals are going to get scared because they get so much grief for doing it. That's just my 2 cents.
I've got a couple questions. One
Okay,
is.
hang on, hang on. We gotta raise your hand. I got
Bill
identified.
Cohen, then David.
Trying to get in, there's your hand. Okay. I just wanted to say on this is that I understand the simplicity of Orleans, where they're just making this statement, but coming off of this examination of what Richard had tried to do, this, complaint, it's kind of like you do all this, you can do this at 30 days and this at 30 days, and you wait 60 days, and then they get back to you, and I didn't feel satisfied by that. And when I read this language, it was similar. It's short and to the point, but there doesn't seem to be anything other than kind of going through like the examples of what you have to do, basically mimicking what you have to do with the state, and it's kind of lacks any description. Then when you look at P-Towns, the committee, I agree there might be a little bit too much text here in terms of where we're going, but I did like the idea of this compliance committee being formed to take up the question and sort it out.
Okay, David.
Did 2 questions. One, I would like to hear from Collins what their research shows, because as I look at Orleans, I said, ooh, that is, on the face of it, nice and simple. But then all of a sudden I was thinking, is their town council in-house, or is their town council like a KP Law? Because what happens if there's an enforcement issue where you think the Board of Selectmen are not doing their part? Is the town council an
Collins,
in-house
they're going to see,
department?
they'll see which any of these are working or not. And what I'd like you to do.
Yeah, so I think it's important to hear from them.
Right.
What the track record is on these things.
Right, I would just say, let's think about this between now and next meeting, because we're just about running out of time here, but these 3 examples kind of cover the gambit from one end to the other. One is just like wrestling says, you simply lodge a complaint with the select board, that's it. The middle one is Falmouth, where you give it some more gravity by calling it a complaint, and you show it to the town clerk. I mean, that just has more stature and getting the public's attention that something has happened, there's been a violation. So that, to me, it elevates the public interest and the exposure of the violation. and the third one is much more elaborate with an actual elected commission that goes through the process. So there's like 3 levels here, and you can decide which one you think makes sense, and I'll ask Collins also to look into it. I think that's about as far as we can go tonight for Chapter 2. I want to make one comment, and then we'll finish up on the agenda. I would like, if anybody has anything to say to or to questions for the Collins Commission, please go through the chair. They've told me that they've had instances in other towns where different commissioners go to them separately, and it becomes awkward as to who's doing what, and is anybody being favored over anybody else. He said, just please say to the commission that if anybody wants to express anything to Collins or ask them a question, just let me know, and I'll transmit it and get the response, and we'll see how that works. So I said I'd go ahead and say that. We have 2 sets of minutes. We have the April 25th minutes and the May 2nd minutes. I've read them. I thought they're both excellent. Are we ready to vote these minutes tonight?
Motion to
We
accept
certainly
both.
are. I would make a motion to approve the minutes of April 25th as submitted.
Okay, seconded?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving the April 25th minutes? That's a majority, thank you, they're approved. Next,
Abstain.
abstain, okay. The May 2nd minutes, which are ready, and again, a nice job.
Motion to accept.
Motion to accept, seconded.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving May 2nd minutes? Okay, thank you. And just a couple things in upcoming meetings. We have the courtroom for meetings on May 26th, which is, Michelle, be sure I get these dates right. I think it's May 26th, is it, and then there's one in June. Is it June 13th? Let's see, it's, June 16th. Yeah, June, Thursday, both of those are Thursday nights. We were closed out on Monday nights for different reasons. So it's 2 Thursdays, May 26th and June 16th. You need special permission of the select board to use the courtroom, and we have it.
16th going to be COPC?
So those 2 nights, that's where we'll be. And
I'm
is
sorry,
there
Bill.
any new
Are we-
business?
Are we meeting on May 16th?
Hmm?
Are we meeting on May 16th?
Yeah, we meet May 16th.
And then again
Right,
on the 26th?
That's here in this room.
And then we meet again on the 26th?
And then May
So
26th in the courtroom.
So 4 meetings in May.
Right. Yep, and is there any, let's do old business first. Any old business?
I have some old business. Old business. Last week, we were talking about the position of a electrical electrician. And it was brought to my attention by Dale Weber, Precinct 3 Town Meeting member. He indicated that, yes, Town Meeting had put that in the budget, but in the year 2020, when the pandemic hit, and they bounced our town meeting out, trying to sort out when we would have a town meeting, they removed it in that budget, and town meeting voted for the removal of it in the consent agenda. So I guess it's an example. I think what we were debating was, what we were discussing was the spirit of this tracking of an article and where it goes, and when it doesn't get enforced, why isn't it getting enforced? I guess that was the deliberation. I was talking about Stevensville, somebody else was talking about the electrician. But it was brought to my attention by Dale that his recollection of that town meeting was that, yes, we did put it in the budget, and then when the pandemic hit and we had that consent agenda and we were trying to cut back spending, we took that out, and we've never put it back in.
Okay. Any other old business, new business? Okay, that does it.
Motion to
Then
adjourn.
a motion is in order to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in
Second.
favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.